Thank you. Thank you. So there have been a lot of really great talks so far about things that we all, myself included, struggle with. And I'm here today to talk about another difficult, thorny, but hot topic, finding the right place for data in product development. But who are you, Vicky? We've never heard of you. What makes you qualified to talk about this? Great question. Not a lot. Just kidding. I have been fortunate to work with some really great teams over the course of my career who've taught me a lot of really great things. So I started my career at Adobe, where I was a product manager working on improving the implementation process for Adobe Analytics. And there, I learned a lot about enterprise SaaS. And then after a couple years at Adobe, I joined a quickly growing Utah company called Lucid Software, which you heard a little bit about yesterday. And a little over a month ago, I joined the Vivint Smart Home team, where I'm leading the product efforts for Sky, the world's first truly intelligent smart home assistant. So I've been fortunate to work with some really fantastic teams. And today, I'm going to focus mostly on the wonderful folks at Lucid Software. They taught me a lot about product development, a lot about building world-class product development teams, and they stuck with me through the ups and the downs, like that time I wasted 2 months of development work. So I'm going to tell you all about this juicy case study, but before I do, let's level set a little bit on a few things about data and being data-driven. Data-driven. This word has become so overloaded. It's kind of like the holy grail in tech culture, and especially in SaaS companies. But what does it really mean? It's easy to get so wrapped up in this data-driven concept. And we've seen this overwhelming cultural shift to incorporate data in product development for good reason. Decisions that are made using data yield much better results for your product and your business than decisions that are made based on opinion alone, as Alan just talked about. And KPIs, A/B testing, cohort reports, all of these things have gotten so much traction because they really do make sense. But the problem is, it's so easy to get so wrapped up in this concept of being data-driven. And as Kendall and Josh talked about this morning, letting the business case drive you instead of real customer value drive you. It's easy to get so wrapped up here that we lose sight of the forest for the trees. We get so wrapped up in being data-driven that we lose focus on the overall customer experience. There actually is such a thing as optimizing your product into the ground. Just ask our friends at Zynga. And I get it. Your first experience with running an A/B test, mine was an awesome redesigned landing page on lucidpress.com. It's super addicting. It's like this gateway drug into becoming obsessed with data. You see the tangible impact of your work over what existed before, and you're hooked. So I'm not here today, though, to tell you that being data-driven is a bad thing. In fact, I believe it's a very, very good thing. But to be data-driven and to get the most out of data in our product development processes, we need to be cautious. And that means being clear on a few things. First, being data-driven does not mean chasing metrics. Second, chasing data does not mean chasing revenue. Sometimes, not always. And third, being data-driven is not the same thing as being data-informed. Sometimes, the most important thing that you can do and the most appropriate thing you can do is to let data inform your decisions rather than drive them. So with all this said, I believe that being data-driven is a very good thing. And by that, I mean relentlessly pursuing data in the conversations that you have and the decisions that you make. Relentlessly pursuing data over opinions. That is to say, using data in your journey, not letting it in and of itself be the destination. All right, let me tell you about how I learned all that the hard way. So in summer of 2016, I was working at Lucid Software. You may remember Lucid from Taylor's talk yesterday on Star Wars and the realism threshold. And let me tell you a little bit about what Lucid was like, what Lucid is like and was like at the time to give you a sense of the kind of conversations we were having. So Lucid was founded in 2010. It's about 7 years old, headquartered 25 minutes south of here in South Jordan. Between its two products, it has a little over 11 million users, and now has pushing 250 employees. When I joined the company in 2014, it was about 50. So it's really, really high growth. It's raised 41 million in 3 rounds, and is consistently ranked a best place to work because of this culture of excellence. It has 2 products. So Lucid Chart, its flagship product, is a diagramming and data visualization product. Taylor talked a lot about it yesterday. But Lucid also has another product called Lucidpress, which is a design and layout application. And this is the one that I was actually working on. So Lucid has a long history of being data-driven. And Lucidchart, which was the flagship product, actually paved the way for this data-driven culture. But it's a culture that evolved over time. When I joined the company in 2015, that data-driven culture looked a lot like landing page and email tests, largely focused on statistical significance as a measure of how worthy the test was. And then shortly thereafter, we moved to focusing on some product KPIs and running some in-product A/B tests. And then that sort of spurred the growth team, which at the time was just a couple people, but eventually grew to be much bigger. And as the growth team grew bigger, they started becoming more sophisticated in their testing, looking at things like alpha values and p-values and all the rest of it. And then the engineering organization got involved and started building custom testing frameworks and feature flags and tools for non-developers to really make data scalable and sustainable across the organization. And now Lucid is running some very complex testing with subtests and using certainty intervals. I see people taking photos. I don't mean to say that this is like the way you should do it necessarily, but this is how Lucid evolved during my time there, with Lucidchart really paving the way. Now to the point where even summer interns conceive of, define, design, implement, and monitor a whole portfolio of A/B tests, and that's just one of their summer projects. So by summer 2016, I had seen hundreds and hundreds of A/B tests, really successful A/B tests run by the Lucidchart team that combined to generate multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars of incremental revenue for Lucidchart. And so at the time, Lucidpress was in a little bit of an interesting spot. We'd fallen behind on some of our revenue and our revenue modeling and forecasting, and we needed to make up that money. And additionally, I was getting a ton of pressure from the organization to be more data-driven, be more like Lucidchart, increase our A/B testing horsepower. So I hatched a plan to put together this epic of what I called conversion boost tests. So it was going to be 20 A/B tests that we were going to run. And I knew that not all of them would be successful, but it was great for a few reasons. We had lots of these tests. We could make a lot of money quickly based on what I'd seen with Lucidchart. Also, with 20 tests that were relatively small and discrete, we could get the whole team involved. So whether you were a QA tester, a UX designer, a product manager, our general manager, all of us got together and we brainstormed these tests. And we got in a room and we voted on our top 20 favorites that we were going to run. And again, we knew that not all of them would succeed. Even the best growth teams, Lucid's included, see most of their tests fail. But that's the idea with the culture of testing. Lots of them fail, but you still have enough to make it really successful. So that's what I thought would happen here. Let me tell you about a couple of the tests that we ran. So this is the Lucidpress template chooser. When you open the docs list and you go to create a document, it used to be that you had to click a little green button. Maybe you can't see it on the screen, but I promise it's there. A little green button that says plus document to create a new document. And then this template chooser would open, and then you would see the possibilities. So we had this idea for a kind of obvious test where we would open the template chooser by default for new users, hopefully engaging them more and ultimately driving them to pay us. Come on, clicker. There we go. So then we had another test. This one was more noble. So we called it the delayed upgrade growl. If you're on a free account, when you sign in, right away, this little green growl pops down from the top of the screen saying, upgrade your account, pay us. And we thought it was really annoying, and that maybe if we were less annoying, customers would like us more. Spoiler alert, not always true, interestingly. We'll talk about that in a minute. So we thought that maybe if we delayed it and were less annoying about it, they'd like us more. So we kept the control, the A arm of the test, TA, having the growl show up right away. We also delayed it by 2 minutes, 5 minutes, and 10 minutes to see what would happen. And then there was this one, the paywall slider on publish. So one of the ways you can get your documents out of Lucidpress is to publish it to the web. And that process takes a minute. So normally we show you this loading bar, but we had an idea that we could use that time to surface some of our paywalls to make some of our premium features more visible. So that was this test. And some of them were downright slimy. I'm not proud of this as a human. So the way this one worked is that we would actually let you use our premium templates, which were usually unavailable to free users. We'd let you use them. We wouldn't say anything about it. And then at the end, right when you went to download or print, bam, we'd put a big watermark on it. It was not awesome. But the next one, which will show up on the screen in a minute, the next one was even worse. So this one was the page limit on download. So on free Lucidpress accounts, you can create documents of up to 3 pages. But we don't let you create documents longer than that without paying us. So this test, in the B arm, we let you create documents longer than 3 pages, but we warned you. We put up this little orange growl that said documents over its page limit, you won't be able to download, publish, or export. And then the C arm of the test, which we affectionately came to call the shaft, we would let you create documents longer than 3 pages. We did not warn you about it. And then at the very end, when you tried to download, boom, paywall. No downloading without paying. So again, the whole purpose of this epic, and these were just a few of the examples of tests that we ran. There were about 20. The whole purpose was to drive first payments. And that's a metric that we use at Lucid to kind of measure conversion. And it includes it's the first time somebody pays for a product, the first time they swipe their credit card, not including future payments for the recurring subscription. We also cared a little bit about some of these engagement metrics, things that demonstrated that a user was having success with the product, things like downloads or document creates or returning document creates, which is when someone who has already created a document comes back and creates more. But I cannot stress enough how focused we were on first payments. This is very much in our blood and was the whole purpose of the epic in the first place. So it sounds great. It was not great. Let me tell you some of the results. So the template chooser. After an initial spike in first payments that looked really exciting, there was a drop. And then ultimately it leveled off to right around 0 impact. And it had very low certainty. Just about 51%, which is basically random. And what's worse, we need to make all this incremental revenue up in Q3, and this test took forever to run. So much for that plan. The delayed upgrade growl was surprising, as I mentioned, but not much better. All of the delayed growls performed worse on payments than the initial growl, which is still kind of a conundrum to me. And then the paywall slider on publish. Same thing. This time it converged around a very low, this time slightly negative impact. And again, very low certainty. Yes, watermarked premium templates. This one had a whopping 0.03% lift in first payments. So again, basically nothing, and basically random. So this next one, this clicker doesn't like me every 5 minutes. So this next one, the page limit on download, and looking at first payments. I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but I will give you guys one guess as to how this test turned out. I wish this was some dramatic presentation reveal where I was going to share a plot twist that changes everything, but it is not. It also converged around basically no impact with very little certainty. So all in all, this was about 2 months of development work for a full team, UX designer, 8 engineers, 2 QA, a couple of product managers, 3 months minimum to know the results, and those results were minimal impact and low certainty. And this is scary to admit on a stage in front of 650 very bright people, but I screwed up big time here. I did one of the things that most product managers I know are most afraid of. I wasted the time of a very, very talented development team and the money of a very, very talented company. Not for the record why I now work somewhere else. But I had such good intentions. I was trying to be more data-driven. We were data-driven. We ran 20 A/B tests. But at the end of the day, we put the cart before the horse. Running A/B tests does not in and of itself make you data-driven. And being data-driven does not in and of itself make you successful as a product or as a business. So where do we go wrong? How can you not waste 2 months boosting conversions and have it amount to nothing? Well, first of all, most of the tests that we ran were very small changes. It turns out that if you want to make a big impact, you often need to test big changes. And that's not what we did. But we hadn't run a lot of A/B tests before on Lucidpress, and so we didn't really know what to expect. Second, our sample sizes were way, way too small to reach significance on these tests in any meaningful period of time. Lucid Chart, with way more users, can run A/B tests and reach conclusions in a matter of days or maybe weeks. But Lucidpress has a quarter of those users. And so it took us a really long time. Many of these tests took literally 6 months to ultimately reach 95% significance. And they still didn't really have an impact. And relatedly, we had set very unreasonable expectations for ourselves on the timeline here. So we said we were going to release this epic, we were going to have all these wins, and we were going to be on our way to the next thing in the next quarter. But the reality was that wasn't realistic. And also, another thing to keep in mind here that hit really hard for me was that our testing maturity on the Lucidpress team did not match the standards that we'd set with Lucidchart, who had been running A/B tests and perfecting their testing maturity for several years before we even really got started. Finally, we ran the tests all at once with no plans to iterate. So we ran 20 A/B tests and had no idea how any of them were going to turn out. And in reality, we would have been a lot better focusing on 2 or 3 A/B tests and then iterating on those early results. It wasn't all bad, though. We did have some small improvements from some of the tests that we kept around in the product, and we learned a ton about A/B testing and a lot about what not to do in the future. And actually, some of these tests laid foundation for future work, future epics. So this one, the template chooser that was open for new users, while it didn't have the impact on first payments that we'd hoped for, it actually did pretty meaningfully impact some of our engagement metrics. And so it ultimately laid the groundwork for this new template chooser experience. So now, when you come into Lucidpress, instead of seeing the docs list and then having to click the green button to open the template chooser, you actually see this great template chooser right at the very top and gives you an idea of the things you can create right away. And we actually A/B tested this one with a lot of the learnings in mind that we learned from the Conversion Boost epic. We didn't focus on first payments as a metric. We focused on document creates, which is a metric that users are going to hit a lot sooner, and so we were able to get a much larger sample size and call the test a lot faster. Also, it was a really big change, so we did have the big impact that we hoped for. So that was a pretty disappointing experience, all in all, with the Conversion Boost epic. And I want to talk a little bit about how you can make data work for you. For me, I learned here with the Conversion Boost epic that testing a bunch of experiments all at once isn't necessarily good. But as they say, good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. So I started off this presentation talking about how being data-driven is really about the journey, about incorporating data into your journey of building great products, and not being data-driven as in and of itself as the destination. And it's easy to paint this beautiful picture of how nice it is to use data in your product development, drive off into this beautiful sunset with your team. But in reality, it can feel a lot like this. It is hard. Even when you're doing it for the right reasons, even when you're doing it right, it is hard. But it is worth it. And if you're doing this product development thing because you think it's easy, you are not in the right field. So some words to the wise about how to use data effectively in developing your products. First, understand your purpose, and make sure you have a good one. Don't just run a bunch of A/B tests for the sake of running A/B tests. Second, choose the right tool for the job. Not all data is created equal for all purposes, and we'll talk about this in a minute. Third, use your brains. Interpret results judiciously. And finally, embrace data as a team. Let me explain what I mean. So the first tip was understanding your purpose, making sure you have a good reason for bringing data into the picture. There are a lot of bad reasons to use data. As I learned with the Conversion Boost epic, one of them is being data-driven. Not a great reason to bring data into the picture. Another bad reason to use data is just for the sake of having a number that you can talk about. Vanity metrics, things that don't really mean anything or have meaningful implications for your business. Also, confirmation bias is a really bad reason to use data. Seeking out data expressly for the purpose of proving something you already believe to be true. In many of these situations, data is just a distraction if it's not being brought into the picture for a good reason. There are lots of really good reasons to use data, though. And most of them come in the form of meaningful questions, like a few of these that I'll talk about from my career. Many of the teams I've worked on have asked the question, should we fix XYZ severe bug that only happens on some obscure browser version? This is a great time to turn to Google Analytics or Kissmetrics and look at what percentage of your users are on that browser version and will be affected. We had another situation at Lucidpress where we had a bunch of buttons in the top menu, and we were debating whether or not we should collapse them into a hamburger menu because they were getting to be kind of unwieldy. And we wanted to affect the fewest users possible as we could by doing that because the hamburger menu was a lot less clear. And so we looked at the distribution of browser window sizes across our sessions. We also had released a new feature in Lucidpress where you could order prints and go through a shopping cart directly from within the product. And we wanted to know where customers were falling off in the print order flow so that we could optimize that experience and help more of them have success with their print orders. Or at Vivint, where we recently launched a new feature called Smart Comfort, where the artificial intelligence will automatically adjust your thermostat to help you be more comfortable. And we noticed that some people were turning it off, and so we surveyed them to find out why. Or when I was at Adobe, we went out and conducted several weeks of on-site customer interviews to understand the biggest problems facing digital marketing teams today. And ultimately, the data we collected from those interviews informed the big strategic bets we made with our roadmap. Those are all great reasons to use data. But having a worthy reason for using data is not enough. That's kind of like saying you want to go to Europe because it's got a lot of history and you want to experience it before you die, but you still have to figure out how you're going to get there. And just like not all data is cut out for every job, the way to get to Europe is not by canoe. So there are lots of tools you can use and lots of ways to bring data into your conversations. And for me, I often try to start by being really clear on the question that I'm trying to answer, and by thinking about where that question falls on this discrete to open-ended, qualitative to quantitative kind of spectrum. Is it a question like, what kinds of products should we offer to our customers for print and ship? Something a little more open-ended and qualitative. Or is it something like, where are they falling off in the print flow? These tools are not an exhaustive list, just some of the very many tools that we would use at Lucid. And they're not going to fall in the same spot on this map for every question that you're trying to answer. But hopefully, by starting and giving yourself a few minutes up front to think about the kinds of questions that you're trying to answer and what the best tool is for the job, you can save yourself a couple weeks of sending out a survey only to learn that you would have been better suited to interview a few customers for an afternoon. It's important also to recognize your constraints. I don't know how many of you have taken a freshman physics class, but when you start out, one of the first questions you're asked to try to solve is to understand the forces acting on a mass sliding down an inclined plane. And then, as you get to more complicated problems, you're asked to solve problems involving differences in temperature and pressure. And with all of these, there are these imaginary constraints that they put in place to make things a lot easier. And that can be there's no friction, or you're in standard atmospheric conditions. But the reality is that friction does exist. And summer days are hot. Atmospheric conditions are rarely standard. And you're not going to have all the time you want to collect all the data you want to collect. And even if you do have all the time, the data you want might not be available. So these are both pretty common constraints that I have dealt with. Last fall, for example, when we had launched that print and ship feature, we were concerned that customers might not be satisfied with the quality of the prints that they were getting from their print partner. And we were considering making room in the 2017 roadmap to integrate with a different partner. And we had to make that decision really fast. Ideally, we would have gone out and we would have spoken to every customer on the phone who had received a print order since we launched the feature, but we didn't have time to do that. And even if we did have time to do that, we couldn't have ensured a 100% success rate and response rate. So what we did is we surveyed those customers and we extrapolated the results. So it's important to weigh the constraints that you're facing in selecting your research method. And there are a couple of others. One is the relative importance of the question you're asking. Of all the 1.5 million things that you could be spending your time on, is this really the most important thing? And then similarly, the importance of getting it right the first time. So again, I saw a lot of these constraints in my time at Lucid, so I wanted to share a couple of my favorite tools to use when you are constrained. One is guerrilla internal testing. So when we needed directional feedback, like yesterday, about a new idea that we were vetting out, the UX designer I worked with, Rob, and we'd go around the office and we'd show some of the prototypes Taylor showed yesterday in Lucid Particle to the team. Now, caution, beware. That worked really well for us because we had people in our company who looked like our target users in our target market and who were not familiar with our product and what we were doing, so they were unbiased. But this should not be used at somewhere like Vivint, where most of the people in the building do not represent the average smart home customer. It's good for quick user feedback, but most of the people in the building at Vivint have every sensor that we offer, which is not what the normal customer looks like. After the conversion boost situation, I learned a lot about A/B testing and how you don't always have time to run a fully statistically sound test. And so we started looking at things like cohort analysis, where you look at the behavior of a group who registered before a new feature was released and the group of people who registered after the new feature was released. And we also looked at longitudinal analysis, where we would look at the performance of a given metric over time. One of my favorites that we also started looking at towards the end of my time at Lucid is confidence intervals. Confidence intervals basically allow you to say, we're 90% sure that the result is that the new variant is between X and Y% better than the control. And this is not so great if you need a really precise answer, but it's really great if you're just trying to get an executive or a team member on board that the direction you're pursuing is a good one. And then finally, Daniel talked a lot about design sprints earlier. I've run a few at Lucid, and one of the most valuable things that I learned from that process is that 5 conversations with users is enough to see a pattern. It's really easy to think that if you're going to do a bunch of in-depth user validation, you need to do 10 or 20 or 30 user interviews. But really, 5 is enough. Like you test 5 people in the last day of the sprint. 5 is enough to see directional patterns, to understand if you're on the right track or not, or if you should pivot. And it's a lot easier to schedule 5 interviews in a day than it is 10 or 20 or 30. And even in B2B SaaS, I have done it. OK, this is very, very important. Data and results are only as good as the data collection that gathered them. And data is not, I repeat, is not an excuse to not use common sense. If you want data to help you make better decisions, it's critical that you use your brain to interpret results judiciously. So this watermark test taught me that better is not always better. And this is why it's important to use your brain. Technically, that test had a 0.03% lift in first payments. But it was a crappy user experience. Ultimately, we want our products to, we want our users to have tremendous positive experiences with our products because they deliver real value. And we want the users to pay us because they're getting real value, not because we're slapping them with a paywall at an inconvenient moment. So even though something might look better in the data, be a good human and do the right thing by your users. Also, it's important to keep your eyes on the prize. I mentioned not losing sight of the forest through the trees, so we've covered that already. Another thing in keeping your eyes on the prize is to beware local maximums. It's really easy to be looking up and optimizing yourself to the top of the nearest hill, but there might be a much bigger hill over there, a better design, a better experience, a bigger opportunity. And it's important to pick your head up every so often and evaluate what you're doing. And finally, know when to quit. A couple months ago, we integrated WebGL into both of our web applications, which dramatically improved the performance and the speed of both Lucidchart and Lucidpress. But the thing is, we spent weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks analyzing afterwards exactly how positive of an impact that was because we wanted to know the ROI on our efforts. But the thing was, we knew it was better. From our internal testing and our testing with users, we knew that WebGL dramatically improved performance. And so we could have spent that time that we spent analyzing. We never did reach a conclusion. We could have spent that time we spent analyzing, releasing new tests instead. So you understand your purpose. You pick the right tool for the job. You have interpreted your results judiciously. Those things are all great. And once we started doing them on the Lucidpress team, we really learned about how to embrace data as a team. Everyone on the team has a role in bringing data into your culture. Whether you're a UX designer or a product manager, a QA, engineer, everyone has a role in making data work for you. And like anything that's a team sport, it's really important to be open-minded. I've seen a lot of resistance from UX designers who don't want to go with the answer that the qualitative data shares because it goes against their design ethos. And similarly, I've seen a lot of really stubborn product managers who are so hell-bent on pursuing the decision that was revealed in the data that they're blind to the fact that data does not always tell the whole story. Remember, effective teamwork incorporating data into your process is a give and take. It's not important that you get it right the first time, but it's important that you try. Finally, I want to share one other small example, kind of unrelated to things we talked about before, that we learned as we incorporated data into our process at Lucidpress. So a couple quarters ago, I wanted to understand how much work we could get done in the next quarter in the form of Storypoints. And so I asked all of our engineers on the team, whose names have been changed to protect the innocent, I asked them all to list out their full capacity in Storypoints for their a sprint where they were being 100% utilized. And then for every sprint after that, I asked them to put in a multiplier based on what other work they might be doing to support the broader organization. So for example, if they were speaking at a conference or if they were recruiting for 1 week of the 2-week sprint, their multiplier would be a 0.5. So again, initially I was doing this as a planning exercise, but these numbers illuminated some really interesting dynamics on the team that we didn't know were happening. First of all, I learned that there was a really wide variety on our team of how well each of the engineers were being utilized. And there were some people who were particularly underutilized because they were being tapped for lots of other things. I also learned, and this was shocking to me, that the teams were 62 and 70%, or 60 and 72% of their full capacity on average. That was like really bad news. But it was good news because having those numbers, I was able to go to our engineering leadership and say, hey, we need more resources to deliver on this roadmap. And so I did, and we got those more resources. So I bring this example up to suggest that you talk to your teams to brainstorm some places where you could put lightweight, low overhead measurement in place to put some numbers to what you're doing on your teams, because you never know what those numbers might tell you. So like any effort that you're going to ask your team to spend time on, it's important to plan together and plan ahead. Do your homework to design it thoughtfully, design your data collection thoughtfully, and to involve your team in the process. I don't care if you're a product manager or a UX designer or anybody else on your team, and I don't care if it's a Mixpanel event or a Kissmetrics event or a Google Forms survey that you're sending out. If you're going to put it in front of real customers, you should treat it like the other things that you're going to put in front of real customers. You should design it carefully, and you should test it. And similarly, if you have expectations for how it's going to work, you should document them in Jira, in Google Sheets, Google Docs, whatever. I've done all of those things. You need to document those requirements for your tracking and your data collection, just as you would important feature requirements. It really sucks to be 1 month into an experiment or collecting data to realize that your tracking isn't working, or maybe that people aren't getting assigned to the right arm of the test that they should be getting assigned to. I have done it. I've been there. So document those requirements. And then test your data collection. Test it before you release it, and test it right after it goes out to production. Also, it's important to allow enough time for measurement and iteration in your process. If you're going to set expectations that your tests are going to be called and done right after the initial version, you'll never get to the future versions. You'll never get past phase 1. And something that can help here is to schedule readouts with your executive stakeholders or the other stakeholders on your team. Schedule them far enough in advance that you'll have time to iterate and analyze and make recommendations for next steps. And then finally, reflect and refine. We actually, at Lucid, on the Lucidpress team at least, we would hold epic-long retrospectives in addition to our normal 2-week retrospectives every sprint. And one of the things we'd cover in those epic retrospectives is how the data collection went and how the analysis went and what we could do differently next time. OK, so I know you're all checking your watches, dreaming about how to be first in line at the Milky Way truck. So let me recap really quick. If you're going to take just a few points away from my talk today, let it be these. The whole point of bringing data into your process is to make better decisions. Don't let yourself lose sight of the forest for the trees. Second, it's about the journey. Being data-driven is not in and of itself the destination. And in your efforts to do that, make sure you understand your purpose, choose the right tool for the job, interpret results judiciously, and embrace data as a team. And if you do all of those things, you'll reach, to me, what is the real holy grail. Measuring as much as you can, doing your best when you can't, and always striving to turn to facts over opinion. Thanks.
Good night. Take a cue from the light that's fading.